It was the summer of 1988. A combination of drought, heat, and lightning ignited multiple fires across the Yellowstone National Park. At first, the fires were small and manageable, but the conditions were extreme. Winds picked up, humidity dropped, and the fires merged into a massive inferno. For context, the fire started in June 14th and finally went out from rain and snow in September 11th. By the time it was over, nearly 800,000 acres, about 36% of the park, had burned. At the time, it looked like total devastation. Visitors described hillsides reduced to blackened skeletons of trees. Wildlife habitats appeared destroyed. Many people believed that the park had been permanently ruined. But what happened next would change how scientists understand fire forever. Some of the dormant trees in Yellowstone, like the logpole pines, actually depend on fire to reproduce. Their cones are sealed with a resin that only melts under intense heat. When the fire swept through, millions of these cones opened up and released seeds into the nutrient-rich ash. Within a year, green shoots began covering the burned ground. Instead of dying, the ecosystem responded with unexpected resilience. Wildflowers bloomed in massive numbers due to the increased sunlight. Grasses and shrubs returned quickly, providing food for animals. Elk and bison populations rebounded as new grazing areas formed. Even birds like woodpeckers thrived, feeding on insects in dead trees. Over the following decades, the landscape transformed, not back to what it was, but into a more diverse and dynamic ecosystem. They learned that fire wasn't just destruction. It was a natural and necessary force of renewal. It's not how we draw up. It's not what we like. But somehow death precedes renewal. So what can Jesus' death tell us about the renewal that was to come? That's this week on A Little Better. Our goal on this podcast is to know Jesus better and with the power of His Spirit, do better. So together, we can be a little better. Welcome back to the A Little Better podcast. This week, we're continuing our series called 4 Days, where we're looking at, I guess it's not the final 4 days of Jesus' life, because it kind of continues after, but this pinnacle of 4 days from Thursday through to Sunday. And here to talk about it, we have Drew Karshner. Welcome back on the podcast.
Good to be here.
If you're wondering, or if you're new to the podcast, this is all about helping our church family, Northridge Church, mature in their faith. So if you are new, feel free to subscribe so that you get notifications, whether that's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. We love to help people on their journey. And this is one we're really it feels like we're just like notching up again in this story of Jesus's, the pinnacle of the gospel. So I'd like for you to catch us up. We're on Good Friday. Catch us up. What's happened in the story? What is happening? Frame in what we're talking about today.
Yeah, so we're going from basically Jesus being arrested, which is really Thursday or Friday. I think there's a debate on where. So middle of the night. And really we walk through the events of, from his arrest to his trials. So he stands before trial, the Sanhedrin, before Rome and the governor. And so like this process of trying to figure out what to do with Jesus, right? The Jewish people wanted him to die. Pilate's kind of like, oh, I don't know. And then he offers them this choice, Barabbas or Jesus. They choose Barabbas. Jesus ultimately walks to the cross and where he's crucified and where he surrenders his life.
What's fascinating about this story for me is the lack of sleep. As I was listening to your message, and as you kind of said, it just kind of keeps going.
Actually, the disciples got some sleep.
they did, yeah. If you're wondering where that was, that was last week. The disciples were supposed to be awake and watching, and they decided to have a wee kip. Yep. But I just get this sense of exhaustion going on.
Yeah, I didn't dive too deep into this, but I wonder, even as a part of the Sanhedrin, how often was this happening?
Right.
How often are they? Because this is kind of like a firefighter getting called in the middle of the night to respond to something. The Sanhedrin is being, they're all not sitting at Caiaphas' house. They all, what takes so long in this journey and why it goes through the night is because Jesus is arrested and they have to bring the Sanhedrin to Caiaphas' house. So there had to be, and again, there's no like, yo, I got my cell phone, I'm calling the Sanhedrin. There's a process in how they would get the Sanhedrin to come to Caiaphas' house. And so Jesus sitting in a cell, waiting, and then finally everybody arrives, and then they bring him out. And so it's weird. It feels like such a quick moment in the Bible. But this is like, it's an all-night process, right? It's from, 12 to 6 a.m. in the morning.
I want to go through in this episode through the different characters that we see. And you're bringing up the Sanhedrin to start off with, and I want to dig in there. But you mentioned that you went to Caiaphas' house, or at least where they believe Caiaphas used to live. What was that place like? You said you were where they believe Jesus was beaten. Was he beaten in there? Like I can't remember. Like what was going on down there.
No, so he's beaten in Rome. Like Pilate has him flogged. So he would have been probably at a public wherever they would whip people. So Caiaphas' house is a large house, right? So he's the high priest, so you can imagine he's in a nice home. It's fairly large. But what's interesting is the like basement area, the like cell area, the jail cell. There's multiple jail cells, so he would have housed, anywhere. I think there is 3, 4. It's just kind of like a cave.
So interesting that the high priest would be at the prison as well.
I just think I think the reason why that is because they when the Sanhedrin gathered, he's the most important piece, right? He is the high priest. So they would all just gather around him for this, legal court system. And it was just easy to be like, hey, let's have the jail cell here. You got guards protecting him, so
it wasn't like it was just a de facto room. It wasn't made to be it wasn't as if he was holding prisoners.
No,
usually.
I mean that's what I don't know how it's a temporary holding place.
Right.
So it's maybe someone's there for a couple hours, maybe a day or two. I would think. Now I'm guessing a little bit here, based off of my knowledge. It was more of people would come there and then they would have the trial and then they would go.
So his house acted as like a court at the same time.
Yes, that's where they gathered they had this open court area. I'm assuming that's probably where they held the Sanhedrin. It's open forum where someone would stand and then they would prosecute.
So we hear in the Bible about the Pharisees, the scribes, and all that. Who's the Sanhedrin?
So the Sanhedrin is this legal governing body of religious leaders. So Pharisees, Sadducees. I don't know exactly how they picked who would be on it, but it's some of the most prominent religious leaders. High priest is there. And they are basically this discerning court system that handled Jewish matters.
Okay. So they're the judiciary of the Jewish people under Roman occupation. Why were they plotting this? This might seem a bit rudimentary, but why were they plotting to kill Jesus? Color in what's going on, because it's quite a conspiracy that they've got going on. So why are they trying to kill Jesus?
Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons. So I think the obvious out there reason is they're claiming blasphemy, right? So they're claiming Jesus is teaching false teachings against God, right? He's claiming to be the Son of God, the Messiah. They don't believe he is. And so blasphemy, again, we hear that term in our culture, doesn't feel like that big of a deal. To the Pharisees, this was their main job, right? To guard against false teaching, to, hold the Jewish people to a standard that they couldn't fall below. So this was a big deal to them. But I think if you get behind the surface of blasphemy, I think the real reason is they're jealous. Jesus is taking something that they love, power. And people are starting to question the Pharisees based off of Jesus's teaching, his new way of leading a countercultural movement, and they notice it. They realize it. Jesus is growing in popularity while the Pharisees are shrinking in popularity. And so there's this pride, there's jealousy, there's hatred towards Jesus. And all of this is being hidden by the claim of false teaching or blasphemy.
Right. So they're coming up with different reasons.
Yep.
I find it really interesting. We talk about how it's like in the middle of the night and how it's all done in secrecy. And we see so many times Jesus is most critical to, I mean, he in his ministry, he wasn't even critical of the Romans, even though they were killing Jews. They were very mean and brutal people. Yep. He was so so biting and critical of the religious leaders, and so I find it so interesting. We kind of get a little bit of a glimpse of why. I think so in Mark 14, it's like. Now the Passover and the festival of the unleavened bread, they were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him, but not during the festival, they said, or the people may riot. Or Matthew 26, where I think you quote when they arrested him, every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, this is Jesus saying this, every day in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. There's just a scheming and conspiracy that's trying to do it out of the public eye.
Yeah.
Do you think that's really because they're just trying to protect themselves? I mean, they said so that there isn't a riot, but it seems like there's, and I want to come back to this later because we have the crowd is one of the characters. We have they're afraid of an uprising or a riot, but then the same kind of people that they're afraid that there's going to be a riot are coming against the people that they're afraid is going to be leading that riot.
Yeah, there's a game being played here, right? There's this game of secrecy, Jesus's popularity, riot, but also a riot's bad for the Pharisees because they're playing this game with Rome, right? And they're sitting under Roman occupation, and the last thing Rome wanted was a uprising. That's why Rome was a little bit nervous about Jesus, because there's this movement of people. They're afraid, are they going to try to overthrow Rome? And so everybody in this storyline is trying to play the game of like, okay, how do I navigate this tension but really get what I want? Rome is trying to get what they want. The Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Sanhedrin are trying to get Jesus killed, and they're all trying to do it within this game of secrecy. Even Judas, right? Judas is, he's not paid by random strangers. He's paid by religious leaders. So behind the scenes, they're working this plan to get Jesus.
What is with the high priest tearing his clothes?
So that's what they did when, like,
just what they did.
There's, I mean, yeah, like blasphemy was, anytime there's, like, if you read through the Bible, a lot of times when sin is present, they would tear their clothes, they would put ash on.
I've heard that from mourning. Are they mourning the blasphemy? Is that kind of the expression?
I think it's their way of saying how serious this is. Like, they would tear their clothes and act. It seems like they're acting a fool, pull their hair out. Like it's kind of the same response of like, how dare you say that, right?
It's I think we talked about this before in Acts when Paul is being told don't go to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Later on, and there's like a big to do where the guy like rips his clothes and he's like, don't go. It seems like I think of like one of my boys trying to get our attention and doing something. I told my son, Milo, it's time to be Milo this morning. This is just this morning, not to be a cheetah. Like, he was crawling around them. I feel like there's like kids do all these things to try and like garner attention.
I think, even the high priest, as he rips his clothes, he says, do you hear this blasphemy, right? Mm-hmm. And what should we do? And everybody agrees, right? And so... Yeah.
So Jesus is critical of the religious leaders. In what ways do you see ministry leaders fall into some of the same kind of things today? Maybe not necessarily scheming to like kill someone. I know there's a lot of things out right now, has been for a number of years, of cover-ups or people trying to protect the church from wrongdoing.
Yep.
Do you kind of see that as part of the same kind of religious leader thing that's going on? Or how do you more broadly see religious leaders today falling into the same kind of patterns or traps?
I think the big one is pride, right? It's one of the big enemies, especially, church leaders, that you're given a position of power. Again, we talked about this last week, right? You see Jesus uses his power to serve others. And, a lot of pastors use their position of power to gain more power or gain more influence or gain more success. And I think ultimately that's the religious leaders liked their position of power, and they would do whatever they could to keep it. Right. And I think we see that in the church, from covering up things that should be transparent and out in the open to hiding sin and covering up that sin because they don't want to lose that position of power. And so I think pride is a big root cause of the Pharisees and how the church has handled situations, just like the Pharisees. I also think there's a side of it like where the Pharisees, they were so... I don't even know how to describe this. I think a lot of pastors, I can fall trap to this, where like you're so busy doing ministry that you forget to be with Jesus. And I think that's why the Pharisees missed Jesus, right? They were doing the right things, right? They should be fighting for, truth, and they should be fighting against false teachers. And so their actions are actually like in line with their job responsibility. Right. But they're so busy doing their job that they miss what the very words that they quote are actually pointing to. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the ways that church leaders can easily fall in the same trap, is like, I think Jesus even says to them, like, you do all the right things, but your heart is far from me. Mm-hmm. And I think, as church leaders, we gotta be really careful that we don't just do ministry, right? I'm in my Bible all the time, right? I am. But when am I in my Bible? Not to work, not to develop a sermon, not to, perform a task that pays for my family's provisions, but to like be in Jesus's presence. Mm-hmm. And I think the Pharisees really missed that.
Power feels like a fire that when you get too close to it, consumes you.
Yep.
You're in your position as lead pastor, you're closest to the fire, if I can put it that way.
Yep.
How do you feel the heat radiating off? Like, do you feel that pull of, or the lure of power at times? And what does that look like for you? Or how do you guard against it from being consumed by it?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the best ways I feel that is when I'm challenged, right? Like when someone challenges my way of thinking or a decision I made or whatever it is.
So by doing this podcast.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. And I'm just like, oh, hold on. And I can find my flesh being like, whoa. Yeah. Do you know I'm your boss, right? Like, can you speak to me that way? And like, you have to constantly fight against power. Yep. It's contagious. It really is. And if you don't fight against it, you will fall trap to it, right? Mm-hmm. And I have, right? Like I have easily, in leading over 10 years, fallen trap to like the enemy's lies of like, he'll whisper in your ear like, hey, don't take that from them. Like, hey, and so there's a balance of like learning to put yourself in a position where you're humbled enough to like hear wisdom when you need to hear it. Even in like, our families, right? Like with my wife, like I have to listen to her voice, right? God gave her voice in my life as part of our family. And so it can easily slip no matter where you are, right? Like there's so many positions of power, and probably many people wouldn't label them that, but you got to be careful, right? But yes, like I've talked about my humbling experience. I don't want to go back and learn that lesson again, right? And so I try to, as much as I can, stay humble. And I think the best way I've done that is put people in my life who will tell me the truth even if I don't want to hear it, right? From pre-preaches to, the elders in my life. You almost have to like be in a constant place of being told no. I think leaders like get to a place where they're never told their idea stinks. They're never told like this is bad. They're just surrounded by people who are like, oh, you're so good at what you do. You're amazing. And you need that. Don't get me wrong. You need people in your life who encourage you, but you also need people in your life who will disagree with you, challenge you, and sometimes I feel like no shortage of that around here.
No, as much as I want to challenge you on it or ask how you feel it in your position, because you carry a unique responsibility, I want to honor the fact that I think you create the environment of humility on our team, and I'm very grateful for that. Coming from a different environment to it's quite rare to have that, I think. And so I'm very grateful for the level of humility that you come with things and the openness, the environment that you create, because it's very easy to create an environment where of yes culture or being a yes man. It's like, no, you can't say no to me, but you have created a culture of collaboration, and where you're not just sitting on a seat where you make all the decisions and everyone needs to suck it up. So I want to recognize that at the same time.
I think the one thing that leaders miss out on is it takes the pressure off, right? Like there's a pressure I feel, but like I feel like I feel the heavy weight of the pressure of leading the church, because I don't feel like I'm doing it by myself, right? And I think when everything has to revolve around you or be about you, the weight just kind of sinks, and I'd rather disperse that weight.
Speaking of leading and weight, the next character I want to hit is Pilate. This is a really interesting character in the story. Who is Pilate? What's he about?
He's the governor, so he's the guy in charge of managing the tension of the Jewish people and Caesar and uprising, and so he's there to basically somehow play this game of keeping the Jewish people happy enough where they don't try to overthrow Rome, but also implement all of Caesar's and all of Rome's ways. And so Pilate has a tough responsibility.
Caesar is above Pilate.
Yes.
What I find really interesting reading through this, as a government is there to do good for the people and to judge. It's not to say that there aren't different systems of governments, like we talked about the Sanhedrin being like the judicial part of the Jewish people. But he's been brought in to this situation to make a judgment that the Jews are wanting him to do favorable for them. So there is a bit of a quid pro quo, I think, going on, as you're alluding to. But he doesn't do his job. He shirks his responsibility by saying, do you want this guy or do you want this guy? Do you want Barabbas or do you want Jesus? He knows that Jesus is innocent. Like you even say in your message, like they couldn't find anything against him, both in the Sanhedrin and in before Pilate. It's like they couldn't. And I just find it so interesting how maybe this is all part of the whole thing of power, but he shirks his responsibility. He doesn't do it.
At some level. Right, but I would say a higher responsibility to Pilate was keeping the peace.
Okay,
and what he's trying to avoid is this riot.
So he's placating.
Yeah, he's placating. I mean, the Sanhedrin is using Pilate in this moment, right? They're bringing Jesus to Pilate not because they want him, like, oh, Pilate's wise, he'll give us. No. They are using him to get Jesus killed, right? They don't have the authority to do it, so they're like, we'll use Pilate. And I think they didn't know Pilate was going to offer that, but they kind of knew the game, right? They schemed this up, even as it says like early in the morning after they had made their plan. And so I think they're adjusting to how Pilate is responding in the moment, but they've kind of thought through, they've been here before. Okay, we know how Pilate works.
Explain why they need Pilate to do it. Why do they not have the authority to do it?
Because the Jewish people can't have, in their laws, they can't have someone crucified, right?
But could they not just like take him out back and?
I think they probably could have stoned Jesus, but I also, again, you think this game being played, the Jewish people knew also that Jesus is very popular among their people, right? And so if we can get Rome to kill Jesus, the people, they'll riot Rome. We're fine. The Jewish people were fine with that, right? So everybody, again, they're just like, there's just all this manipulating going on and people trying to keep peace. Pilate's trying to like, he's innocent, but like, I can't have a riot. And so you see this like unfolding of all this junk right here in Jesus's trial. And, things you don't get to mention is like, the scriptures tell us that Pilate's wife has a dream about this, right? And she's like, you don't have anything to do with. And so Pilate's also trying to like heed his wife's warning, and he's caught in this middle ground of like, I kind of feel for Pilate. Like, what's the guy supposed to do?
Yeah.
Right? He kills Jesus. He's a bad guy. He doesn't kill Jesus, and he's like just caught. And his wife's telling him like, yo, be careful. I had a dream about this. And so he's trying to honor everybody, and he loses.
Have you read any of Pilate's letters to this is, I'm going to read a chunk of this. So if you're listening, like settle in a little bit, but this is fascinating for me because we think that the Romans and Pilate, they're just kind of like separate. But as you're saying, they're trying to keep the peace. They're highly integrated, even though they're in occupied Roman territory. The Jews and what Pilate is having to deal with is quite fast. So like coming and hearing from Pilate's perspective is fascinating. So this was a letter from Pilate to Tiberius Caesar as opposed to Augustus Caesar. He says this: had I not been afraid of the rising of sedition or insurrection among the people who were just on the point of breaking out, perhaps this man would still be alive to us, although urged more by fidelity to thy dignity than induced by my own wishes. I did not, according to my strength, resist that innocent blood free from the whole charge brought against it, but unjustly, through the malignity of men, should be sold and suffer, yet, as the scriptures signify, to their own destruction. I mean, it's quite like the interpretation from the Greek is kind of confusing. But then he says this in his letter to Augustus Caesar: I, O most mighty, a narrative to give thee, on account of which I am seized with fear and trembling. I therefore ordered him to be crucified, having first scourged him, and having found against him no cause of evil accusations or deeds. And at the time he was crucified, there was darkness over all the world, the sun being darkened at midday, and the stars appearing. But in them there appeared no luster, and the moon, as if it turned into blood, failed by her light. And the world was swallowed up by the lower regions, so that the very sanctuary of the temple, as they call it, could not be seen by the Jews in their fall. And they saw below them a chasm of the earth with the roar of the thunders that fell upon it. And in that terror, dead men were seen that had risen. And as the Jews themselves testified, and they said that it was Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the 12 patriarchs and Moses and Job that had died, as they say, 3,500 years before. And they were very many whom I saw appearing in the body, and they were making a lamentation about the Jews on account of the wickedness that had come to pass through them and the destruction of the Jews and of their law.
That's pretty intense.
This is the Roman guy.
I know.
Like the color that kind of fills in of like the fear and trembling that not just that he had by letting an innocent man be crucified, but what he witnessed too.
Yeah.
I found it quite shocking because we hear, I'm pretty sure this is in the Bible as well, but a blood moon, it went red.
Yep.
And he's describing that the moon turned into blood.
Yeah, the way he described darkness too, just like, oof, that's pretty.
Now the Romans they obviously had all their like Hades and I will link where this letter is found, and the translation of it in the show notes if you want to read it. Both letters, there's much more to it, which is fascinating. But he references Hades, which is the Romans had their own gods and stuff like that. So it's just so interesting from their perspective. But in all of that, to hit on the blood moon, it's amazing to me how, I mean, you referenced in your message about the prophecies and how scripture called from this.
Yep.
are called of this very early on, for hundreds, thousands years before. But how from when the planets were put into the sky, God somehow orchestrated at that moment, a blood moon was going to happen. That darkness was going to descend. There was no luster, as Pilate even wrote. It's like, it makes your spine tingle with how this has been orchestrated.
And being like, to be there in that moment, and I mean, can you imagine, we talked about the Sanhedrin, right? They're around for this, right? How do they not be like, oh,
yeah,
crap, what have we done?
Mm-hmm.
This is, this goes beyond coincidence, right? When things like this happen, I mean, you're just like, how, it just it boggles my mind how they don't wow, maybe we were wrong.
Right.
There's no evidence of that. That you talk about that fire of power, that's how powerful it is.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to botch up. It's either astrology or astronomy. I can never remember the difference. One is very different than the other. But even going back to we call them the wise men from when Jesus was born.
I believe it's astrology.
Astrology. Thank you very much. And astrology in that time was very it was more prominent. They saw things in the skies having a lot more meaning, and that's what drew them to Jesus. It's like, something's different in the sky. We need to follow this. This has never happened before. We need to go figure this out. So that was 33 years earlier. We're still in that time frame. So people probably know about this more than the whole star structure stuff today. We're like, are you Aries, or whatever this means and all that stuff. But I can't help but just culturally what was going on, how much people would have just been so frightened.
Well, I mean, think even, what was it, a couple years ago, we had that total solar eclipse. Where it's a beautiful day, and literally it just goes dark. It was insane. That's kind of maybe a small glimpse of.
We knew it was coming, and we've kind of had variations of that before, but it's like, man, what is the spirit God's doing right now, quite amazing. Let's talk Barabbas. This could be brief, but who is Barabbas?
He's a criminal. He's a guy who's I didn't do much research. I've done digging into Barabbas and what he was accused of. I
did the work for you.
Okay, good. I'm old and I forget.
It was ironically insurrection.
Okay. Jeez.
And murder.
I thought he was a killer. Insurrection. I love that. Hey, we don't want an insurrection. Let's let go a guy who is an insurrectionist.
It's like Pilate's afraid of insurrection. So what does he do? I mean, kind of sounds like January 6th all over again. He lets the January 6th people go. It's like the insurrectionist is set free. You're like, man, so Barabbas is obviously criminal. He's clearly guilty.
He's a bad dude.
And it was custom for the Romans to let, out of goodwill, to let someone go. I don't know do you know, I don't, if Barabbas was the one that they were initially planning to set free?
I'm assuming they probably, it was sometime, I think Pilate was like, oh yeah, we've been talking about this. I'm assuming they had conversations of hey, we do this every year. So it was a scheduled thing. And I'm assuming it's probably around that same time that they do that, right? And so I would assume they had a process in the Roman system, jail system, people who were okay, here's the people who are up for this. I don't know if he had served a bunch of time and this is kind of like parole. This is, hey, you're getting out early because you've been good and you've served this much time. I don't know how it worked. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming Rome, knowing the way Rome worked, they had a system.
Mm-hmm. Really, the interesting thing here is the crowd. The crowd that's going on. So I'm trying to get my head around it, because we've got the Sanhedrin is scared of an uprising from the crowd. I mean, the crowd's very ambiguous.
Yeah.
Jesus is popular. They're scared of an uprising of a riot, or I'll say an insurrection of the Jewish people led by Jesus. So they see Jesus as the threat. Now, all of a sudden, it flips, where now it seems like the same people are saying that would have been on Jesus' side, flip to say, no, crucify him.
Yeah, I'd have to dig in a little bit deeper. I've always wondered this too. Like, who is part of that crowd? So obviously you've got the religious leaders there. Mm-hmm. But how big is this crowd too? Like at some point, I know it does say as the crowds gathered, I think in Matthew 27, Pilate, it says that before he offers them the choice. Mm-hmm. But like, it does feel like quite a flip. Right? There's this huge crowd following Jesus, but maybe there was a whole nother crowd that didn't love Jesus like the Pharisees. Maybe the Pharisees they do like, it's just very interesting. It's like they flip the script real fast.
Is it all of a sudden mob mentality? Could be. I find that really confusing as I read the scripture, where like, what does that tell us about the human condition?
I mean, it tells us a lot about the human condition. It also tells you just like, this is a sovereign moment from God. This is his salvation plan, and nothing was getting in the way of him redeeming humanity, right? So I think you do see the depravity of man, but also the sovereignty of God moving through people. Mm-hmm.
There's, even as you're talking about it, what's coming to mind is how, like, I can't remember when we talked about this, but like how Saul's heart was hardened. Maybe it was last week. Pharaoh's heart was hardened. God has this somehow ability to harden people's heart. And I wonder if that is what's going on, is that God, who knew as he created the heavens and the earth, and as he ordered the stars and the moon and the planets to align in a certain way for a blood moon, he's like, I need this to happen, and flip the script. I mean, it's hard because it's conjecture because we don't really know exactly what's going on.
Yeah, who's in the crowd. Yep.
I find that a really confusing thing. Then we have the Romans. Another one I find really interesting, and I don't know if you can speak into, is like they had no real skin in the game when it came to Jesus. It doesn't seem like Jesus was a threat to them directly, unless Sanhedrin kind of said, no, he's a real threat. But it's like, I don't understand why the Romans, apart from just being a very brutal people, why they did such mockery. Why can't you just like nail him to the cross? Mm-hmm. Why did you have to go through the humiliation if you had no skin in the game?
I do think Jesus was a threat to Rome. I think they were always afraid of insurrectionists, right? And to them, Jesus wasn't threatening that, but he was building such a crowd, a popular, he was getting so popular that they were nervous if he decided he wanted to overthrow Rome. Mm-hmm. I think they were always watching that.
When you say popular, do you mean, because there's a lot of like popular people out there, like in today's time, like doesn't mean that everyone ascribes to what they're talking about.
Yes. But I think at this point they have had their eyes on Jesus and just the sheer amount of people who are starting to follow him.
Follow or just being curious and kind of that, oh, that's Jesus, but he's weird, but I just know who he is.
When I say follow, I mean this in a loose term of like crowds gathering, right? Jesus had no problem getting crowds. And the more he healed, the larger crowd. I think they're also like, okay, well, hold on a second. We're dealing with something different too, right? This guy's healing. So there's this large crowd gathering him. There's this unknown of like, this man is powerful. Mm-hmm. And I think they're always kind of like, okay, are they going to overthrow us? You know, in this culture, you're always protecting your kingdom. You're always watching for who's getting ready to attack, from, you know, the random people like Barabbas, and then, you know, popular, powerful people like Jesus. So I think Jesus, he never threatened Rome, but to Rome, they were like kind of watching him, surveilling him of like, okay, where is this going and what could this lead to?
Yeah, the Romans, I believe, they saw their empire as being salvation, and that they could heal, they can be prosperous, and if I can try, I hate referencing things where I don't have the reference point. If I find the reference, I'll put it in the show notes. But I remember hearing it said that Jesus' healing ministry was in a direct affront or a direct counter to the Romans' claim that they could heal. So the Romans, like, we can heal, we can do this. And yeah, you could argue like roads, for instance. There's a lot of like sanitary and you look in Italy in the fountains, public water. I mean, they did some incredible things, but healing they could not do.
Yeah.
But they said that they could. And Jesus being like, no, I actually can. My kingdom is way more superior, even though he's not out to take over Rome necessarily. He's out to create a new kingdom, a spiritual kingdom. And I wonder how much, because again, Pilate, he's not oblivious. He knows what's going on. He's not in a vacuum.
Yep.
So the Romans, like to back up what you're saying, I think probably knew he's actually probably making some, even though it may be indirect, threats to our empire here.
Oh yeah, he's talking about a new kingdom, right? Like, I mean, those are fighting words in the ancient culture, right? And I think we live in such a different culture now, but like in these cultures, it was, you did everything you could to protect and gain, right? Like Rome was all about, where's the next land we're going to conquer? We're going to take over the world. And so they also had to live in the side of like, we have to protect what we've fought for, what we battled for. And like, I think they had probably a CIA unit that they probably didn't call it a legion that did surveillance, that ran around and got information and passed it to Pilate. Pilate, here's what's happening. Here's what he's teaching. There were probably Roman people reporting back to Pilate, hey, he taught this. Like, I would not be surprised if they are, surveilling Jesus, watching out, like, where is this going? It would not surprise me at all.
I just want to slide this fact in here, is that as the Roman Empire were trying to take over effectively the world, they didn't get Scotland. They were like, what is this brood of people, this like mental people up here?
People.
That there's Hadrian's Wall and Antonine's Wall. Antonine's Wall, fun fact, actually went through the back of the church that I was growing up. This is why I know this, and I'm quite proud of it, is that they got to like a point in North Glasgow and they couldn't go any further because we're that mental. So yeah, they couldn't take the Scots. We're the last character, we have to talk about Jesus. And I loved in your message, and I think that it keeps coming back to the story of Jesus is just so incredible. And at the center of all of this fray, Jesus is kind of this quiet figure.
Yeah.
And at times not even answering questions. What goes through your mind when you read this?
The first thing is, wow, I'm so far from Jesus. Honestly, like,
far from being like Jesus?
Yeah. Jesus is way different than I am. I think what goes through my mind is how quick I am to defend myself. And sometimes even when I'm guilty, Jesus is not guilty and doesn't defend himself. I'm enamored with Jesus. I'm like, wow. I mean, like, why would you do this for us, Jesus? Why? Like, there had to be something better you could die. Like, I'm overwhelmed with his love and his grace and his mercy, his willingness to surrender, his willingness to fight for us, to give us grace when we don't deserve it. But what's so interesting is you look at the different trials. Jesus does speak in the first one, and he speaks boldly. And he's speaking to really the people who represent him, and he claims who he is. What's interesting is Pilate asks him the same question. So the high priest in the first one asks Jesus, you say you're the Messiah. Jesus says, you said it so. And then he says, yep, I am. Yep, you guys are idiots, right? To Sanhedrin. You should know better. But to Pilate, he doesn't say anything.
Why do you think that is?
I think Pilate was closer to Jesus than they were. Like, just in like thinking, I think Jesus was constantly getting after the Pharisees because they were the ones who were teaching the people. They were like, and I think, at some level I'm like, man, do I want to teach people God's word? Like the accountability and the weight that you should carry about like, be very careful where you're leading people.
Yeah.
But I found that interesting that Jesus does respond to the Pharisees, but to Pilate's just amazed, like, well, you're not going to defend yourself. It's almost as if Pilate tries to defend Jesus.
Like, speak up for yourself. Like, defend yourself.
Yep. And I also think Jesus, when he responded to the Sanhedrin, he was setting in motion his death, right? I think he knew he needed to basically make them even like seal the deal, basically.
Almost expedite the process.
Yes. Yep.
What's one of the most profound moments is where he says that he gave up his spirit. And it was a willingness. It wasn't simply something that was just taken from him, but he willingly gave up his life. I find this, so in John 15, so greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for a friend. I mean, it's a very common passage. I've heard it used more like kind of with regards to the military as well, of like giving up one's life. It seems to be the most human thing. Like, we talk about servitude, but there's something about its life that makes us human. And when someone gives up their life, it's like, it's this most profound gift of humanity that you can't have anything greater than that. And Jesus is like, I'm giving you my life. Have you seen Hamnet? It's the
the movie. You're talking about the movie? I haven't. What was I listening to that was offering the review of it? I forget.
I want to be careful in referencing this if you want to watch. I actually very recommend. I think what Les Mis was when it came to like grace, and it was very profound, Les Miserables. I think Hamnet is I think just as profound. That's quite a bold claim. I think it was a phenomenal movie. And I don't think I've cried that much at a movie, just to be forewarned. But it's known, it's a fictitious retelling of Shakespeare, who him and his wife lose their son. And there's this moment that they say, so it was, his son is a twin of his sister Judith. And the son comes down the stairs, and Judith, like, we're thinking, is she gonna die? And the brother comes down, his twin sister, in this moment, and lies next to her, and he says, "I'll take it. I'll take both. It'll take us both. We'll go together." So basically, they can't tell us apart because we're twins. Death can't tell us apart. We'll go together. Turn away. It can't tell us apart. I give you my life. You shall be well. I give you my life, Judith. Gosh, it's making me tear up just thinking about it. Like, and Hamnet ends up getting sick, and effectively this moment it transfers. He takes his sister's death and gives her his life. And then fast forward a little bit later in Shakespeare, so Hamnet and Hamlet are basically the same name. So we're in the Globe, and there's this profound moment where Agnes, the mum, comes into the theatre and she's like, "What's going on?" And she clocks what's going on is that Shakespeare, William, is basically portraying this exchange. He's taken the place of his son in his grief. He's trying to make up for it in his grief. And it's like, I'm taking the place of my son's death. And so there's these moments where they're trying to process and communicate this most profound human act of giving up your life. And the whole gospel hinges on this moment, that Jesus gives up his life. And we can watch a movie, we can understand that, and we can feel it. We can also read the scripture, and I think sometimes we feel it, sometimes we don't. But I really hope that as we're doing this series and we're listening to the message, that people gain that gravity of what is going on. I mean, do you feel it every time you read it? Do you kind of get that gravity?
I mean, it's hard. I would say not every time, right?
Sure.
But yeah, it's hard not to, right? Even just during the sermon, reading through, Matthew and the Old Testament, and you're reading things like he was pierced for our transgressions, right? He is crushed for our iniquities. Like, it just hits you. It hits you at a different level. I think when the Passion came out, that was one of those moments where people felt the gravity of it because they got to see the horrific nature of it. But it's like a really perspective giving, really powerful, painful, holy awakening. And yeah, it hits you. It draws you close, right?
There's this exchange of life, death for life.
Yep.
And I think the gravity, the brutality can hit in one way, but it can almost sometimes feel confusing because, okay, Jesus died to give me life, and it feels quite existential, broad terms.
Yep.
What does that really mean for us when we now have life?
Yeah, so it means a lot of things. So it means you have the hope of eternity with him. It means that ultimately the cross is what Jesus says, right? Tetelestai. I don't know if I pronounced that perfectly, but it's paid in full. Mm-hmm. Your sin has been paid for, right? That is the cross, right? Jesus wore the wrath of God. In God's justice, he had to pour wrath out on sin in his holiness. And so Jesus is the atoning sacrifice, the substitutional perfect Lamb of God that satisfies God's wrath and God's justice poured out on Jesus so that we have the ability through his resurrection to have new life.
It's not just simply avoiding death because we're all going to die.
Right. It's the chains of, it's really the chains of slavery have been taken off. You've been uncuffed and you get to walk into freedom.
I wanted to ask about that actually, because later on you mentioned Jesus' death offers you freedom from sin. And so a free slave or a free slave to righteousness, it sounds like an oxymoron or a paradox. Mm-hmm. Like, explain how that works, because it doesn't, again, it feels like an oxymoron.
Yeah, it almost feels like you're leaving one slavery and going to the other, a different kind of slavery.
Yeah, how is that?
Yeah, I think the difference is sin is enslaving, right? It's that comparison that Jesus makes, right? It is the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. So sin kills you, destroys you, right? It steals from you, right? It's captivating, right? And it holds you there. There's no hope of breaking free, and so it's misery. It's a horrible way of life. The opposite, Jesus says, I've come to give you life, which is you become not a slave to sin, but a slave to righteousness. And what righteousness does is it doesn't handcuff you. It offers you freedom. Mm-hmm. It offers you joy. It offers you the things that you want. I love how Paul says in Corinthians, right? If you're in Christ, the old is gone, right? That old way, that death, that slavery, it's gone, and the new has come. There's a complete new life. And I think as Christians, we need to take that, like we become a slave to righteousness seriously. I tried to say in my message, like so many Christians today, they claim the freedom of Christ, but still live under the bondage of slavery. Right? Or we still allow ourselves to be slaves to sin or captivated by sin. And I think the more we understand the gospel, the sacrifice of Jesus, his resurrection, how he has called us to leave that life, to walk in freedom. And I'm not saying that's an easy journey. It's a process, but I think we need to take that line. You become a slave to righteousness.
The picture that is coming to mind is like a pen or a fenced-in pen for sheep, because I'm Scottish. And slavery is like, there's no exit. You can't get away from it. You're confined to that fenced-in pen. But what Jesus does is he creates a door that you can get out of it.
Yep.
And I think what we struggle with is that we're still wrestling with sin. And it can be very hard. Like you're saying, it's like we kind of can easily get sucked back into the pen, but we always have the doorway out.
Yeah.
We have, and we can break free from the pen of sin.
Yep.
Because of Jesus. And without Jesus, we don't have a doorway. Would that be like a fair way of looking at it?
Yeah, I was like, wow, he just came out with that right off the top of his head. Well done. There's no way that there's like pen and goats and sheep in your notes.
There's not, no.
Okay, I'll be like, dang, that's pretty good.
There is snake in here, and which I want to get to in a minute. But yeah, I think it's sometimes because our slave to righteousness is like, okay, we flip the script. We're in a pen of righteousness that we cannot escape that righteousness. But then it doesn't make sense of like, why do I keep sinning? Why do I still have dealing with this sin if I'm a slave to righteousness? That makes it's really hard. Where am I a slave to sin or am I a slave to righteousness?
I think the slave to righteousness means you're walking in righteousness, or you should be walking in righteousness. But like, it also means you are covered in righteousness. So when God sees you, he no longer sees your captivity; he sees your freedom, and you have become like his blood, his righteousness has been poured out on you.
One of the last things I want to touch on was Genesis 3. Now, you initially referenced it in pre-preach, and I think we decided to cut it out because it was like a bit confusing. Where it's called the proto-evangelium, which is really the first proclamation of the gospel. So this is what it says, and I'd love for you to unpack this because I think it's an incredible picture, but is also quite confusing.
Yeah.
It says this in Genesis 3:15, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. This is supposedly the gospel. Explain it for us. This is the first picture of the gospel.
Yeah, so this is really, okay, so it's in context of Genesis 3. So Genesis 3 is the fall, and this is in the context of God cursing the serpent. So he goes through the serpent, he goes through man and woman and their curses. So this is part of the curse over the serpent, so the devil. So he's cursing him, and he's saying basically, because you deceive them. And the point he's making is this is the first prediction of Jesus's death. Right, so it doesn't take long for the Bible to tell us like a savior's coming.
That's and this is strike your heel.
So he basically says he meaning Jesus will crush your head. So he's talking about the snake here, right? And how do you kill a snake? How do you destroy a snake?
Cut his head off.
You go to the head, right? Even I've seen a lot of YouTube videos. I hate snakes, by the way. I hate them. So I love watching videos of snakes dying.
Snakes.
I heard this from a friend, and this is like, hey man, the only good snake is a dead snake. That's biblical. I'm just saying right here, it's biblical. So like it's okay. Jesus is going to crush evil. He's going to kill evil by smashing the head of a snake. So that's the prediction. Evil will be destroyed. But the next line says, but he will strike your heel. So in the battle of good versus evil, there's this fight, and Jesus will be wounded by the snake, aka he will be killed on the cross. So this is the very first prediction, the very first prophecy, pretty amazing, right? Of Jesus dying on the cross for our sins.
There's, this will be my last point. I think I said that Genesis 3 was going to be my last point, but I think it comes to, you can't have life without death, is what you said. and we need to effectively die to self. What does that look like? And is this a one and done thing? Because this is where it comes down to like day-to-day life, gospel for every moment. Is this like what does that look like? The Bible talks about picking up your cross daily. I mean, that's kind of confusing language. It kind of implies that it's not just a one and done thing. Like, I got saved. I like asked Jesus to forgive me for my sins. I'm good. I come to church. But it seems like a continual thing. What does that look like pragmatically for us?
Yeah, so when I think of a verse that describes this best, I think of we walk through the spiritual maturity series, and that key verse, for I am crucified with Christ. So again, we come back to his death, right? We are
Galatians
identifying.
2:20, yeah.
Yep. So I'm like when Jesus died, and I believe in that cross and resurrection, I'm going to the cross with him. And my old life is literally dying on that cross. And so what that means practically is I'm turning from my sin. So the things that I struggle with, I'm going to kill them on the cross. Jesus died for them, and I'm going to leave them there. So I'm crucified with Christ. I no longer live. Here's the die to self, right? I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And so the picture from salvation to Jesus is this ongoing process. Every day, really, let's even get more granular. It's every hour. Sometimes it's every minute, where I'm choosing God's way over not just the devil's way, but like my flesh's way. You know, I think I think, is it James? I forget the book, but it talks about this internal battle between flesh and spirit. So when I accept Christ, I become a new creation. God gives me his spirit. And so every day there's this war that's waging inside of me between my flesh, which is just naturally to do the wrong thing. It's just this natural fight of like, I want the wrong thing, even though I know it's not good for me. Somehow I still want it, and it's the Spirit of God. And so every day you choose, right? Every day when you are around your kids, every day when you're dating your boyfriend or girlfriend, every day you make choices, right? And ultimately the choice comes down to like, will I honor God with this choice, or will I honor my flesh, or will I honor the other way? And so we have to choose daily to crucify our flesh, to kill it. And I believe, and I've seen over my life, is like the more I choose God's way, the louder the Spirit gets. And I won't say the easier, but it's like any muscle. The more you stretch it, the more it becomes more natural. I think at some point in a Christian's life, the flesh should become less natural and God's way should become more natural. That's different for everybody. Sure. But some of that is just seasons too. Some seasons it's like, man, I'm on fire, right? Like I've been in my word, and then you get busy. The enemy's really good at distracting you, and you're back to it. So it's just a constant battle. And so I also wanted to speak to someone who's like in that, like, man, I know Christ, but I feel like I'm failing all the time. Okay, one, we are all that, right? So you are not alone, and you're not a bad Christian. But the great news is, I read in James this morning, but God gives more grace. And that grace is given to you not to make you feel good about your sin. It's to help you through the course of your life to walk away from that sin. And so it's just a daily choice to like not take that drink. It's a daily choice. Not that drinking's bad, right? Like to not say that word in anger. It's that daily choice to say a soft word. To that daily choice not to defend yourself. That daily choice, like so there. It's like so granular too. That daily choice not to think that lustful thought. That daily choice to read your Bible and soak up God so He can help you. That daily choice to like, God, I can't do this without you. I need you. Help me. And so it's such a battle every day. One of the things that my family and I have like grabbed onto, and one of the things I've been trying to teach my kids, and I think this is super helpful, is just the phrase, Jesus help me. And so in our devotions, like, anytime my kids struggle with something, I've always been like, you gotta change your attitude. And I'm almost teaching them like self-sufficiency, like you do it. And we've started changing our language in our house to, Ruby Kate right now is struggling with her attitude at school. And so the last time she threw a little bit of fit over school, not wanting to do it. And I was like, Ruby Kate, all you got to do when you feel frustrated, when you don't want to do your school, just say this out loud. Jesus, help me. And I was like, hey, and every time I get frustrated with you, I'm going to say, Jesus, help me.
That's good.
And it's been like kind of like this, I don't know if it's for my kids or for me.
Probably both.
You know, but like it's been really like eye-opening for me. Mm-hmm. And I find myself daily being like, oh, Jesus, just help me right now.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Appreciate you sharing that. And probably a really good conversation for us to have either with a spouse, a friend, community group of what does that look like for me to, it's such Christianese language to die to self, but ultimately it's this process of becoming more like Jesus. And so if this episode has been helpful, if it's helping you become more like Jesus, like share it with a friend. Yeah. It's like, I would love to even talk to you about this. We're not doing this for anyone other than our church family. We're not trying to like conquer the podcast space. We're doing it for you, our Northridge church family. So share with someone in your community group, have a chat with them of like, I want to be more like Jesus. Jesus paid so much for me to live in righteousness, to live rightly. Can you help me? What does that look like for you? Let's have those discussions this week. Jesus is worth having the conversation about. And we become a little better when we love God and love others a little better, just day by day by day. See you next week.